Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. Jeremy Elwood, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
How you doing? Doing
I'm
well?
good, man. How are you? Yes.
Yeah, rocking and rolling. I've got some kind of personal COVID-y stories to tell. We're going to talk about COVID a bit later on, so I will share them then. But I had the funniest conversation yesterday with Chewy at the end of the show. I said to Chewy, I'll tell you one thing, Chewy, if anything, I'm going to fucking make COVID work hard to get me. I'm not going to just lay down. I'm not going to lay down if it's going to get me. I'm going to work pretty bloody hard. I'm going to make it work hard to get me. It hasn't got me yet, but it's really close.
Yeah, well, as soon as you said that, you were signing your own warrant.
Yeah,
right?
it's just hilarious that it was last night.
How many people do you know over the last year or so who have declared themselves never COVID people, and then a week after they say that out loud?
Yeah,
it's the way it goes.
No, I'm always being very careful, and I say, the intention is not to get COVID. That's intention A.
Mm-hmm.
But always acknowledging that, as long as the virus may not want to participate in that plan. So there's always the out of, yes, there is an intention, but then there is a reality as well.
Yep.
And yes, I haven't got COVID. Well, I didn't have COVID at 2:00 this afternoon, but who knows what's going to happen tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I think that sentence could sum up the world's approach for the last 3 years, isn't it? Intention A is not to get COVID, but COVID may have something else to say about that.
Well, that's every time you hear even the Prime Minister now saying things like, this is going to be the first summer in 3 years we haven't had COVID hanging over us. It's like, no one's told the virus that, PM. Are you aware that the virus hasn't been informed about your plans for us to have a free and easy holiday?
It really is. The whole general attitude has shifted, hasn't it, to, oh, we're over it. We're living in I've heard it so many times, we're living in this post-pandemic world. No, we're not. Not yet.
See that there? You see that? On my screen there? Do you know what that is?
No, I don't. So your rat test. Oh, it's box of tissue.
I'll just get that a shot. I'll get that a shot. Yeah, Professionals wouldn't show there. I've just showed behind the curtain too much, Jeremy. I've showed behind the curtain too much. Push that down. Yeah, all right. And we want to have a look also. People are already mentioning Georgia in the chat. That's great. We'll have a look at that. Actually, I'm going to play some video that most of you may have seen, but it's hilarious. And it's from a week or a week and a half ago with Barack Obama slaying Hershel Walker. It's hilarious. It could be a stand-up routine. And we're going to talk about Mr. Luxon not answering questions. We talked, funny, last night, Jeremy, I played a piece of our podcast where we had Don Brash on. I don't know if you remember this, but when we had Don Brash on, and I played him the audio of him talking to Duncan Garner, and Duncan Garner saying, would you send troops? And he refused to answer. And at the end of it, I was like, you're the one, Mr. Brash, who says that this is a job interview. How can you sit in a job interview and refuse to answer questions? And so we talked a little bit about answering questions last night, and Mr. Luxon today gave us a perfect reply to that by getting asked a bunch of questions and not answering them.
Yeah.
So we'll have a look at that, and we'll also have a look at the COVID surge, but we're going to start tonight with something that we've been talking about for a few nights. I think I put in the write-up to the conversation, the most sensible of the year court awarding goes to the court today who have granted temporary guardianship of a sick baby. So it's allowed to, the sick baby, have an emergency life-saving operation because the parents were not wanting this baby to have an emergency life-saving operation because of their tinfoil hat ideologies. This was a breaking news story. This is only 45 seconds, but this will give us the little snapshot of what was actually said.
The judge has given guardianship of a baby in the middle of a blood transfusion row to the court.
Alice Wilkins has been covering the case. Kia ora, Alice. Have you heard any reaction to the news from the major players?
Yes, a campaigner who is close to the family has posted online that this is devastating news, saying that it is wrong in every way. They also say that the family has lost faith in Starship Hospital. Now, in that decision released by Justice Galt this evening, he accepted that the relationship between the doctors and the parents had suffered and said that both parties will be encouraged to improve their relationship before and after the surgery and to be respectful of one another.
Yeah, so there you go. That was breaking news. It's not a very in-depth report, but it was news just to hand. This was coming out during the 6 o'clock news. We've talked about this several times, Jeremy. So I thought if you got something you want to jump in on this, because I don't know if you've had a chance to talk about this with me in this conversation.
Yeah, we talked about this last week actually,
Okay.
because it was I think that was the first court hearing was last Wednesday, when I was on the show. It's obviously the right decision, and I think it's something that I brought up last week, which is this is not them taking their child away. This decision puts the guardianship into the court's hands until this surgery is done, until this procedure is over. It has an expiry date for January 31st, which in some ways is a nice hurry up for the health system to get on with it. It's not going to be any long waiting lists on this. I mean, two parts of that report that immediately made me kind of set up slightly were, have you had anything from the major players? Well, I'm sorry. The only major players in this were the court, the parents, and the child.
Yeah.
The other players were bit part players who wanted to be major players, Sue Gray and Liz Gunn. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And for them to say something like, they've lost all faith in Starship Hospital. Why? You've lost faith in a hospital that actually wants to give a life-saving operation to your child.
Save your baby's life.
Yeah, good. No, it's the right decision. I do feel for the family involved because, like we talked about last week, I agree with you. I think they've been caught in the middle of this. They've been, however much they believe. We talked about this, the disinformation and misinformation that they've been subjected to even consider that, to even think this. No family go into with an unwell child would have the thought of their own violation, of natural violation, of going, is the blood my child needs vaccinated or unvaccinated? That's something they've been told. And I feel for them. I feel for them, especially, we're 2 weeks out from, it's a hell of a way to go into Christmas, right? But the decision's been made. In my opinion, it's the correct decision, and it's not a long-term decision. It's a decision that will expire on the 31st of January or earlier if this poor kid gets the care they need.
Well, they said as well that the operation basically should be happening within 48 hours.
Yeah, that's right.
So you would hope that. I mean, gosh, there's things that you think. I'm a bit of a a daydreamer. I'm not using that term like I always think these lovely flowery things, but I just think about everything and like you just hope now it goes well. Because if it doesn't go well, it's going to confirm everything that all the conspiracy theorists said. I hope it goes well. But also, I think about Christmas that you just mentioned. I mean, and I kind of think about it like this. Assuming it all goes well, I mean, there's risk in every operation, is that these parents will have a baby with them where potentially they wouldn't have had if something had gone terrible the other way. So
yeah, that's right. I mean, we say this operation should happen in the next procedure. Actually, I'm not 100% sure if it's an operation or a procedure, but it's going to happen in the next 48 hours. But again, we heard, one of the experts that was quoted last week was saying it really should have happened 2 weeks ago. So
several weeks ago. They used the term several weeks ago, I think. So whatever that was. Yeah, and also just to surmise or summarize actually what was said, a judgment released today by Justice Ian Gold about 6 p.m. said the baby is under the court's guardianship from today until the completion of their surgery and post-operative recovery. The latest is the order is in place until January 31st, 2023. I guess, I mean, I was just thinking if there were complications and the child needed care for longer, I guess that would also therefore mean maybe they could go and get an extension or something. But Stephen's made an interesting point. I don't know if I necessarily agree with what Stephen said, but there's kind of an addendum that I'm thinking to what Stephen said. Is seeing the parents are so worked up over this, I hope that they were to get some grief counselling available to them to help them cope. Now, I think that's wise because, even if their grief or their angst is misplaced, it's still angst and will still do that stuff to you. But I guess what I'm doing is take one step away from what Stephen has said and go, how does a parent get to that point? Because as was revealed yesterday, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Jeremy, but they've given that child a blood transfusion before with no conversation around the vaccinated, unvaccinated blood. So it's happened before, and the parents authorized it. What has happened, and how do you get to a point where you are now being so influenced by external sources that you've gone from, allowing your child to be taken care of with a blood transfusion correctly to the kind of conspiracy theory that could cost your child's life? How do you get there?
I think that's a really interesting point, because there have been a few comparisons made, not overly made, to be fair, but in the media that they've brought up the cases, similar cases to this in the past, almost all of which were around religious guidelines. A Jehovah's Witness family who didn't want medical intervention, a child who was taken away for religious reasons. That's different. That is very different from, like you say, this is a family that they're obviously not fundamentally opposed to the idea of a blood transfusion. They've just been told somehow, they've been convinced that vaccinated blood is risky, whereas there is zero medical evidence for that. So two things. I agree. There should be, I agree with Stephen. Actually, there should be counselling available. I mean, I think there should be counselling available for, any parent who has to go through a medical procedure with a child. But also, and again, I wouldn't necessarily go this far, but a friend of mine mentioned on social media today, if something goes wrong because of the delay in this treatment, he actually thinks that Sue Gray and Liz Gunn should be, legally culpable for, neglect. Like I was saying, that's pushing it out. But, what happened in the interim? Where did those ideas come from? And we're going to be dealing with fallout for this for a long time, unfortunately. COVID's not going away, and neither are the conspiracies.
Jay has said something. Actually, now we'll put this up with a smidgen of salt, because I know nothing about it. I mean, if it's online, Jay, feel free to send us the link. There's a zero report on this, but Jay says, I understand. As soon as you say you understand, it doesn't sound like there's a report. But anyway, we'll read it anyway. I understand it's necessary. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong one, Jay. I'll listen to the other one from Jay. I heard this case clogged up some pretty dire and long-standing court cases, essentially pushing them out till next year. The selfishness and ignorance of these people is infuriating. If that is indeed the case, I would completely agree. I know the case was, well, firstly, it was meant to be heard last week, and then even today it was meant to be a morning only, but it turned into a full day hearing, which, on a busy court docket would certainly push some cases out. I mean, I don't know. I can't back that up with any exact facts, but yeah, it's a fair point. And I think we were talking last night, maybe the night before, about the only people to come out of this with any kind of, well, you hope the people that come out of this with the positive outcome is the child and the parents, because there's a child with the healthcare it needs and the parents. But if it goes badly for them, then the people that's going to go well for, i.e. profile that it's given Sue Gray and Liz Gunn and Counterspin Media, then there's no downside for them if it goes badly. There is a huge downside if it goes badly for the baby and the parents, but there's no downside for them, because they still get to put themselves out there as some kind of, I don't know, bunch of misfit morons, but that unfortunately have a following now, and this has given them more of a following in that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to that statement of, the family have lost faith in Starship Hospital. I would have a huge amount of faith in a hospital that's willing to go to court and for the well-being of my child. Not that it was actually Starship who took this court case, but I have friends who work for Starship. Huge shout out. They do an incredible job.
Of course. Rob said something interesting, actually, talking about speech. We certainly need to discuss as a society how we deal with the consequences of such hazardous speech, life and death stuff, but no skin off the nose of the villains, no skin off the nose of the villains in this story. In other words, it doesn't affect them at all. I think probably, I mean, I hear what you say, Jeremy, what your friend said on social medias, but I mean, no one could force the parents not to do it. So I think ultimately in all ways, it'll be with the parents. But yeah, I wonder where the line of demarcation is between, someone having their views heard and followed versus kind of enforcing them on someone and sucking them into a negative consequence. There's got to be, like, if you're brainwashed, if you're in a cult, then that could be something. I don't know where that line is, but it's got to be somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's a much bigger topic. When I say bigger, all encompassing. I mean, that is one of the huge arguments around the free speech debate at the moment, is where does free speech tip over into incitement or encouragement for something horrific to happen. That the old adage, which has kind of completely lost its sell-by date, is that yelling fire in a crowded theater. But yeah, I mean, I think that is something that long term, that is a very, very gray area at the moment.
It's an incitement to violence. That's where my line is.
Yeah.
The problem with that is there is a movement. I don't think it's a very big movement, but there is unquestionably a movement to try and define words as violence. Like people, you hear that in some sectors, words are violence.
Yeah.
And so if the line of demarcation for hate speech, which is where I would put it, is an incitement to violence, but a sector of society gets to define words as violence, then that makes it very muddy.
It does make it very muddy. And also, I mean, even whilst I actually agree with your definition, even that can get muddy, because an incitement to violence, it's one thing to do what Kanye has done for the last week or so, which is basically type "I like Hitler" into Twitter over and over again. But there are other ways of, at the moment, even referring to something like January the 6th in the US could be seen in some sectors as an incitement. But yeah, you're right. And that's my point as well. It is a very muddy argument.
Hey, let's talk about COVID. It's a story near to my heart at the moment.
Sorry, this is new to me. I've never heard of it. What's this?
You've never heard of COVID?
No, the COVID thing? Is it
COVID is an alt-right pop rock band out of Seattle. They're called COVID.
Great.
And they're good.
Oh,
it's
cool.
really good music.
Yeah,
It kind of really gets in deep. It almost knocks you out, actually. It's like it really hits you hard and lays you flat, their music. It's really good.
Really, really cramped venues. Yeah, great.
So a report today, right? And I'm going to extrapolate, and sometimes that's dangerous. But I actually think it's incredibly fair here, because there is a statistical reason why the extrapolation, in my opinion, is fair, based on wastewater, right? Because that's actually a measurement. So there are 7,000 cases, topping 7,000 cases for the first time. I think it's closer to 7,500 cases for the first time since July. The BA5 subvariant is continuing to be pushed out, making up fewer than half of all the cases for the first time in months. Ministry of Health data said there were 7,490 cases reported yesterday, but the reality of cases in the community based on wastewater testing was probably double that. Now, we got told last week by the ministry that they thought only about 35% of people were reporting. So somewhere between 2 and 3 times that number. So it's somewhere between 15,000 and 22-ish thousand cases, which is huge. We'll stick with 15,000 though. I think it's fair to be 15,000, because based on the wastewater, which is a measurable, tangible, scientific look at things, there was 15,000 cases on that day. Tuesday apparently tends to be the highest day of the week, because some people daily reporting their infection during the weekend. And that's just another story. It's covering the same thing. Ministry of Health data said there were 749. Tuesday, the reality of the cases in the community based on wastewater testing is probably double that. So let's call it 15,000. I think that's fair to call it 15,000. This is a great resource we use often, Jeremy. It's from The Conversation. And the reason I use this is because it was at a time where we were all reporting very, very well. Right. So what I've done is I've gone and had a look when we were at about 15,000 cases a day. And the answer is March. Beginning of March, we got up to 15,000 cases a day. Then we went up. End of March, we got down to 15,000 cases a day. So basically, start of March, we hit 15,000. We kept going up. End of March, we came down 15,000. So what was the country doing when we were at 15,000 cases a day? Well, in March, we were in red. There's March. There's March 11th, 2022. And up here on the 23rd of January, all of New Zealand moved to red at 11:59 and didn't move to orange until April. So 2 weeks after the cases came back down. So the last time there was this many cases in New Zealand, we were at a red setting. What is a red setting, I hear you ask, as we all feel like March this year was about 7 years ago? Well, life at red. You can get basic needs such as food and healthcare without showing proof of vaccination. So we'd moved into not having to show proof of vaccination. You can travel anywhere in New Zealand and visit friends in whānau. These are the things. You must wear a face mask at most indoor locations. You can go to cafes and bars, attend gatherings and events, go to gyms and hairdressers. Some venues have capacity limits and distancing requirements. Workplaces and schools can be open. Keep physically distanced wherever possible. The other thing that's not in here is it was continue to have masks on public transport, planes, that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
So the big thing that was in red that is not there now is that you must wear a mask in most indoor locations. So we went to the supermarket, all those places. The reason I wanted to follow up on this today is COVID is in my house, right? The alt-right band from Seattle are staying at the moment.
Oh, they're touring. Yeah, yeah. So
They're
the borders are open. They're allowed in.
Apparently they're very fucking popular in New Zealand at the moment.
Right.
So I've COVID in the house at the moment. I'm testing negative, but I have to tell you, from how I felt this morning versus this evening, I reckon I've got it. I'm still testing negative, but I fully expect that probably tomorrow or the next day I'll be testing positive. If I'm not, fantastic. If I am, I think I probably will be. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is that I was at the supermarket today. So I got up this morning and tested when I found out that someone in the house had it, and I was negative. So the other thing about red, household contacts also isolate. That's the other thing I forgot to say.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
it's masks in inside places and household contacts isolating. Currently, don't have to wear masks in indoor places unless it's a medical situation. And household contacts don't have to isolate. So at 9 o'clock this morning when I tested myself, I was negative. Someone in the house was positive, so we did a bunch of shuffling around, and there's some ice. We're lucky to have a space downstairs in a big room, and someone's isolating in there, and they're kind of away from the rest of us, and hopefully that'll be the end of it in the household, but we'll see. And so then I went out because the rules now are household contacts don't have to isolate. I went out. Now I wear a mask when I go out. Well, when I go into the supermarket and stuff. So I had a mask on. As I was standing at the checkout at 2 o'clock this afternoon, remember I've tested negative, so I'm allowed to be out with my mask on. 60 centimeters away from me is the lovely young man serving me with no mask on. And I just thought, as I was standing there, fuck, I don't need to have this mask on. These are the rules at the moment. I tested negative at 9 o'clock, but between the two tests of negative to positive, there's a point where you turn positive. After I take my test at 9 a.m., that might be 10 a.m. That might be 10:30. It might be 4 o'clock in the morning. We don't know. If I was positive at that point, standing at that checkout and didn't have a mask on because household contacts don't have to isolate now, I spent 3 minutes there in front of the gentleman, talking to him, chatting away. Could have been breathing COVID all over him. So my concern, and it's been the concern since the change of the mask mandate in particular, is that our friends of the show, including people like Anna Brooks, will say to you, the mask is the best protection for everyone at the moment. I didn't need to wear one today. I wasn't positive because when I came home, I tested myself again for another reason. I was still negative. So I tested myself twice today. But if I had have been, and I had have been breathing on him, and he had a low immune system for whatever reason, he probably would be positive in 3 or 4 days from now. I just think it's a really important wake-up call for us all, especially with the numbers right now being at a point where the last time they were at this point, the government was taking a much more hands-on, let's look after each other kind of situation, which is now, in my opinion, because of politics, not good health measure, hands-off, do what you want.
Yeah.
Jeremy?
I mean, well, I want to use your band analogy, actually.
Okay, cool.
But just to put it in perspective, I mean, if you think about that, 7,000 people, that's a big crowd. If a band came to New Zealand and pulled 7,000 people, they'd be a successful band.
Well, 15,000 if we're thinking about it.
Well, I was about to say
15,000.
15,000, which is double it. 15,000 is Spark Arena.
Yeah.
I think Spark Arena, when it's set up for bands, is slightly higher than that. I think it's close to 18. But I mean, it's a full Spark Arena, or I don't know what Forsyth Bar is. It's probably double that again, actually, because I'm
30-ish, yeah.
30. Yeah. So half of Forsyth Bar Stadium. That's a lot of people, right? The mask thing's fascinating because I'm not sure if I mentioned this last week, but I spent October overseas. I went to Vancouver to do some comedy shows and hang out for a couple of weeks, and I just got in the habit of not carrying a mask around.
Right.
I always have one in the bag, and when I was in Vancouver, I always have my man bag with me. So I would put it on, and it was very common for people to put them on when you got on public transport, which I used a lot. You didn't have to, but that, especially if it was if you're traveling at a busy time. So I would have the mask. But I've found myself, my general rule of thumb now that I'm home is, if someone working in a shop is wearing a mask, I will put a mask on.
Right.
But I've been caught out from just earlier today, actually. My local dairy, he's worn his mask since day one. And I went in there and realized I'd left my mask in the car. Because I'm just out of the habit of carrying one with me. I mean, that's just a shift that's happened in me. And it was really interesting for me, because Vancouver was as relaxed as New Zealand, if not slightly more so.
Right.
But then on my way back, I did 4 days, 5 nights in Hawaii. And as soon as you got off the plane in Hawaii, every single person working in that airport had a mask on.
Wow.
Now, again, they don't have to. It's not mandated. And when you were in Waikiki and Honolulu, it was more common than not. If you walked into a shop, the chances are the staff were wearing masks. Now, at first, I was surprised. I was kind of taken aback. Being the US, I thought, okay, right.
But could that have been I mean, Hawaii, there's Japanese nationals are there a lot. And I've said this several times, watching when the All Blacks played in Tokyo, 85-90% of the crowd had masks on. Could that be what it is in Hawaii?
Well, here I think it's 3 things. I think firstly, Hawaii got off very lightly compared to a lot of places in the US, by nature of it being an island, in the same way we did in some ways. Secondly, tourism, such a huge part of their economy. The last thing that, a localized outbreak in Hawaii, if they shut the borders there, it would screw them. The third reason, and I think this is actually the more common one, is they are completely open now for visitors. Most of their visitors are domestic tourists, not international still.
Right.
And you don't know, if you're talking to a random American somewhere, you don't know which state they've come from. You don't know if they've come from California, which has been, had strong mask mandates, or Florida or Georgia, just to segue into our next story. So I think there's a distrust there. There is a distrust and they're very aware that it's not going to take much to have a wave come through. Again, I had Uber drivers say that to me. They go, "We're expecting another wave to come through any day." So we really have. And the language that's being used, even from the government at the moment, you and I were talking about this before we came on air. People are talking. I mean, I've heard the phrase post-pandemic world so many times. People saying we're about to go into our first post-COVID summer. Isn't it great that we're going to have a normal summer, a non-COVID summer? It's still there, it's still out there. And for a lot of people, I don't even need to see these numbers. I just talk to people. People. I work in crowds. That's my job. And so does everyone else I work with. And comedians have been dropping like flies again. And other people, you just have to talk to people in the entertainment industry or the hospitality industry to know that this is on the uptick again.
And look, I've spoken to at least 2 businesses in the last couple of days that are basically on the verge of closing down because of their staff going down. One of them being radio stations. Radio stations are struggling to get people in there, as one in particular that I was speaking to.
And I think also, in terms of the testing, they're saying that these numbers are probably double because people aren't reporting their tests. Well, then there's also, and this is only going to increase over the next couple of weeks, people who just aren't testing. I've actually had this said to me. I felt a bit sick last week, but I didn't really want to test because I had something on that I didn't want to miss. I didn't want to miss the Billy Joel concert, or I didn't want to miss whatever. My work Christmas do was this weekend. And that's just going to happen more and more. No one's going to test on Christmas Eve, unless actually you want a really good excuse not to have a big family dinner. In which case you could fake a test on Christmas Eve and go, "Sorry guys, Christmas is cancelled." So the numbers are going to hurt. Now, we are luckily, we do have high vaccination rates. We do have reasonably high immunity in the community now, so that this spike in numbers isn't necessarily, hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, going to lead to a huge spike in hospitalizations or deaths. But there are still vulnerable members of our society. So yeah, I mean, I would have no problem if they brought back some stronger mask restrictions.
I think they could do that tomorrow, and
Yeah.
public transport, planes,
I
even
think that
public transport planes would be a big one. I was going to share. Let me share. I didn't have this queued up, but I've just queued up. Let me share this story with you as well. Also, Jay wanted to say, remember you were talking about that band with 15,000 people. Jay brings up, and that's every day.
exactly.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's actually a concert every day.
if I could do a national tour and pull 7,000 people at a time, I probably wouldn't be on this show right now.
Oh, shut up.
Well, either that or I'd be funding it. Yeah.
Yeah, there goes better. So Chewy actually put this tweet out the other day, right? I want to read it to people, mostly if you're audio podcasting. Chewy says, as I was talking to a customer off one of the cruise ships in Dunedin this week, and his wife was telling him to put his mask on, and he dismissed her, telling me that there were cases on the boat and they had to wear masks on board, but we don't have to ashore. Chewy's point was very cool. And then this story, you ready for this story? I don't know who this person is, maybe a doctor, I guess, because they're checking up on a tourist. I went to check up on an Aussie tourist we gave COVID antivirals to on Saturday. He didn't ring the MOH to report his positive test. He didn't tell the motel owner he was COVID positive. He didn't isolate. He checked out on Sunday and continued his holiday. No wonder numbers are up.
Yeah. Well, again, this is one of these things I'm saying is that the problem is that the language has built this expectation that we are going into a normal summer, which means that people are booking holidays again, which means that people are getting in partway through their holiday, like this Australian person that's being referenced in the tweet.
Yeah.
They don't want to admit that they've got COVID. They don't want to isolate and ruin, Poor guy's probably been looking forward to this holiday for 3 years, and now he's got here and he's tested positive for COVID. You can't, part of you can't blame him for not wanting to tell anybody and just get his money's worth.
I've spoken to people already talking about, people who are kind of traveling around the country for Christmas, that sort of thing. And I'm like, well, if you're traveling up to Auckland, you want to be careful because you don't want to get COVID and be stuck in Auckland. And the person's like, I just would put a mask on and get on a plane and come back to Dunedin.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah.
I guess that's a plan.
The plane thing was fascinating because actually my flight to Vancouver was one of the first where it was one of the first long haul flights after Air New Zealand had dropped the mask requirement on long haul, on all of its flights actually. But it was interesting. I did some domestic flying the week before I left, and there was still, I'd say, maybe a third, maybe slightly more people on the plane were still wearing masks on a domestic flight. I did a flight after I came back 3 weeks later, virtually nobody. It changes really quickly. It really doesn't. I was in the habit of wearing, I took my mask with me onto that international flight and then realized I was going to be there for 12 and a half hours. And
yeah, that's right.
I had a spare seat next to me. So, I thought, well, I'll gamble with it. I'll risk it.
You got that air thing and blew it right down onto your face to make sure it all just blows past you. And
no, you blow it straight over your head, so it goes. Whatever you breathe out, you just breathe up. It's like blowing smoke out of a moving car.
So I see, still wearing a mask around. I haven't had it yet. Touch wood. Yeah. Yep. So anyway, just so people know, if you're watching, I sort of am expecting to test positive in the next 24 hours, just because I went from nothing this morning to feeling like I've got a cold tonight, meaning it's that those symptoms have come on quite quickly. And I'll be honest with you, if I get it, there'll probably be no show for a couple of days. So if it happens, I'll let you all know. But that's sort of where I'm at the moment. And I just think that this is the idea that if you don't give a crap about yourself, like that tourist that we just read the messages from, that's one thing. But if your selfish attitude goes on to someone else, like the thing we're now talking about is, luckily my kids aren't here this week. They're with their mum. So that's great. But there's so many flow on effect. And I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I'm just talking about the reality of it, because a virus is not going to get in unless you're doing like that person did, not giving a crap when you've got it. Like if it's, you're taking precautions and you still get it, so be it. But the thing is, if it goes from person 1 in the house to person 2 in the house to person 3 in the house, then my kids can't come back here for maybe 2.5 weeks. There's lots of flow-ons from this as well. I mean, I remember I've got someone coming and do some work on the house on Friday. I think when Chewy got it, actually, he had people working in his house doing his bathroom, couldn't come into his house anymore. So it's not just about you wanting to have your holiday or you doing that. It's about what's happening to the person on the plane next to you, who may not be able to take a week off. What's happening with the person, not the person on the plane next to you. What about their vulnerable person at home? I can't get over the selfish nature of people kind of not giving a crap, but I can understand the frustration. So there's two things here.
Yeah, exactly. But it didn't last long, did it? We did have that little purple patch in the middle of all this where people, the be kind era, when people were thinking about other, wear your mask for other, that was the messaging, and it was getting through, I think, but it didn't last long. And now it's all about my personal convenience. I'm not going to get COVID. I've had it. I have had it. Doesn't mean I can't get it again. Doesn't mean that I can't pass it on to somebody else.
Yeah. Well, and it's also around about 25 to 35% of cases now are reinfections.
Yeah, that's right.
So I said before, in an ideal world, you don't get it. And then once you get it, in an ideal world, you don't get it twice.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you've had it, someone came and picked up something from the house today. We didn't go near them. They picked up a trade me purchase, and so we just called out at them and left it outside for them. And they went, "Oh, I've had it twice." And they picked up the plants and they wandered off. No big deal. Politically, we've got the answer. Look, it's like this: if you're boarding a plane while you have COVID, you might as well flip off everyone on the plane while you're at it, for fuck's sake.
Oh, actually, I think I did mention this to you once before on the show, but my wife got invited to a going away party for a guy who was moving over to San Francisco, and she got a call the night before the party, and the party was, I think, 2 nights before this person left the country. She got a call saying, "Oh, he's tested positive for COVID, but we're still having the party and he's still going." Well, obviously, she didn't go to that going away party. But yeah, this person not only had COVID, but had his going away party and then boarded a flight. So,
gosh, what annoys me is when they say, if you have no symptoms, you are sweet on day 7. Everyone I know that has tested positive for more than 7 days. We're just talking about the red system we were in, the red system that we went into in just before March, I think it was end of February, changed it from a 10-day isolation to a 7-day isolation. And like we keep getting told on this show by the experts, it should always have been and should continue to be test to exit, because if you on the rat test at day 8, if you are still showing signs of COVID, you are still infectious.
Yep.
And that should be the yardstick. And it's going to put some people out who on day 10, 11 or 12, they're still showing it. But the other option is you go into the community infectious and then you pass it on to 10 other people, and then this thing keeps going around and around and around and around and around.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I tested positive for 8 days. I think I cleared on day 9. But this is the other thing, actually. It's kind of interesting too, that I thought you might have had it before. I kind of assumed you had. It's kind of fun meeting people who haven't had COVID yet. It's like meeting someone who's never seen your favorite movie. You're just going, oh, you've got this to look forward to.
What's Eating Gilbert Grape? Have you seen What's Eating Gilbert Grape?
It's
my favorite movie.
Many years ago. Yeah.
Look, there's no pride in not having it, and there's no embarrassment in getting it. No. But somehow my 2 sisters haven't had it. 2 of my 3 sisters haven't had it. I haven't had it. No one in this house has had it until now. My kids haven't had it. My kids' mother and partner hasn't had it. I know a lot of people that haven't had it. I also know more people who have, though.
I've been doing a joke when I've been doing live shows where I actually ask the crowd to show of hands who's had it, who hasn't had it, and it's about 50-50.
Yeah, there you go.
Just going off what I can see from the stage, it's about 50-50.
All right, so listen, message for everybody there. If I look, people now, politically hasn't had it, Free Soul hasn't had it, Jay hasn't had it. Yeah, you show offs.
Well, that's because they don't go out; they just sit at home and watch this. It's which we're very grateful for.
And then Emma's had it twice. Maybe that's your average.
Yeah, there you go.
Passing out the averages there, Emma. Because Emma says I've had it twice, maybe because I live in Wellington, in a hotspot. Yeah, I guess that's probably it. Once from the protest in January, and once in a normal way of getting it, perhaps.
Oh, I tell you this, actually, I felt under the weather a few days ago, so I have had COVID, but I tested just to make sure, and I tested negative, but I had to do 2 tests because I screwed the first one up. It had been so long since I'd actually done one. I think I was slightly distracted as well, but it's funny though, because another friend of mine, guy in the US, old friend of mine, Steve Wrigley, he actually put a tweet out a while ago going, do you remember when you first took a COVID test? It was like, you're sanitized, you're wearing basically PPE in your own house. Whereas he was saying, he did his last rat test while he was driving, while he had a takeaway coffee, So it just became par for the course for a while.
Here's something as well, Gigi. Nice to meet you, Gigi. I don't know if we've had you on before. Are all guys vaxxed and double vaxxed? Gigi is asking. Well, I'm not going to get people to commit to that, but if people want to answer that in the chat, they're fine. I'll tell you something. I'm not old enough in the demographic to have the second vax, but because I have asthma, I was able to go and get it, and I got it about 3 weeks ago. So actually, that's something.
The fourth jab.
Yep. And so something else, I'm hoping that if, I don't know, and I'm not, I'm always very careful because I know that if it's like some people are going like, I'm not going to get it, and you get it, it's embarrassing. And then especially doing a show like this, talking about it quite a lot. We talk about this quite a lot because no one else seems to want to. When it's appropriate, we talk about it. I've always said, it'll get me. It might get me. It's not, I'm not saying anything that it's not, but I do feel that because I had that second booster about 3 weeks ago, it takes 2 weeks to get to its peak. If I do get it now, my fingers are crossed.
It's one more
maybe it won't be as bad as it could have been.
Yeah,
perhaps. Look at all the geeks, in the chat talking about being vaxxed and double vaxxed and boosted. Yeah, all you people, all you people who trust science, eh? All you people who trust science.
Yeah.
Hey, let's have a look at politicians not answering questions, shall we? Because that's one of our favorite pastimes. So Mr. Luxon was on everywhere today, bitching about Labor. That seems to be what Mr. Luxon does, which is fantastic when he thinks that Labor are obsessed with him when he can't actually answer a question without mentioning Labor. He was asked in a conversation on TVNZ this morning about his ideas, because he's going around at the moment, as he's been doing for a long time, talking about how, Labor's got no ideas. They don't know what they're doing. They've got no ideas. So he's asked about his new ideas or National's new ideas and if they had any. And we'll have a little bit of a look at this interaction.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, already this year, you saw us come out very strongly about our thinking around how to manage the cost of living crisis. You saw us talk about gangs and serious youth offending, how we get young people from welfare into work. And you'll see a lot more of that over the course of next year, that we've been working very hard on that over the last 6 months. And, as we go into next year, it's important that people understand what kind of government they're going to get if they too tick blue and want to change. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those policies that you've been suggesting so far. Although at the moment we have a tax cut plan from you that you've had to backtrack on, which has faced serious scrutiny. It's led you to admit you'll reconsider scrapping the top tax cut. You've got a plan to send youth offenders to boot camps, military-style boot camps, which basically most experts agreed has not and will not work. So do you have the right ideas to help Kiwis out?
Oh, absolutely. And I disagree with that, Maddie, strongly. I think, when you look at how chaotic the government's, well, let's just take the economic management and the response to the cost of living crisis, right?
So this will be the point he could answer, but he's talking about Labor.
And we are in a situation now, we're looking out for the next 3 years, inflation continuing to rise, interest rates rising, recession on the cards, and almost a doubling of unemployment.
I'm gonna leave that to go, because that goes for another 60 seconds about talking about how bad Labor is, not because I'm trying to hide that as a message, but just to go to what is actually happening. So he finishes that 60-second rant, and then Maddie basically goes straight back to the same question and asks him again about his new ideas.
So are your ideas the right ideas?
Absolutely, Maddie. What we've got is no ideas from this government, and we've got no outcomes. How do you spend $1 billion more each and every year than you did 5 years ago, and on every single metric get worse health outcomes?
And goes further and further, including a whole bunch of, Mr. Luxon was doing it earlier in the year about truancy, which were just flat wrong, the numbers he was saying. Yeah. And they're still using this example of a ram rate every 15 hours. He did mention that in part of that thing. And if you do divide the number of hours they've been this year by the number of ram raids, it does come out to about 15.75 hours. However, there was 13 ram raids in November. So I've said this for a long time. I was very willing to place a large wager on this, that there was probably a period in time during the year that stat would have been accurate, but there was 13 ram raids in November, and that is approximately one every 2 days, or one every 48 hours. So it's always interesting. There was no pushback from the host on that either, by the way, because the headline could be a one ram raid every 15 hours, or the headline could be ram raids on the decrease, one every 48 hours. Well, probably more like every 50 hours if it's 13 in a year. So just wanted to show people and wanted to put out there as well the continuing saga of the non-answering questions, Jeremy.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the headline on that story that you just played, and the ones that people might have seen today, is Luxon says that the new poll results are a reflection of Kiwis wanting change. Now, he's not wrong. He's not wrong when he says that, but it doesn't specifically mean that they want to change to National on him. They just want change. And we, I mean, again, we talked about this last week. They are playing opposition politics as just that, as in the literal sense. They are just opposed to everything at the moment. Now, it is still a year out. They still have time to come up with policies, but so far, I mean, we're not getting anything. We're not getting anything from them at all, apart from just attack. And unfortunately, at the moment, that's actually all they need to do.
Yeah,
that is their job at the moment, and they're doing it reasonably well, I suppose. But Labor have a real opportunity. Labor have a real opportunity to. I mean, if they can come up with some really solid policy in the next, like, sooner rather than later, it's got to come, and really throw the spotlight on that. Now, I don't know if they have that waiting in the wings. I have no idea, but we'll find out.
I mean, like, you'd have to say at the moment that it's Nationals to lose the next year's election today, 12 months out. But I was going to say,
absolutely.
I was going to say as well, and I say this every time these elections come around, talking about the want for a change. What we do in New Zealand politics is you tend to start hearing, oh, it's time for a change. Oh, it's time for a change. Oh, it's time for a change. But what people don't acknowledge is that, the old adage, every cloud has a silver lining. The thing is, the equal and opposite is also true, that every silver lining has a cloud.
Yeah.
So every cloud has something good about it, but therefore every something good about it, every good thing has something bad about it. They're equal and opposite. So the equal and opposite of a time for a change is better the devil you know.
Yeah.
So actually both of those are equal, but we don't ever seem to get a narrative. I'm not even saying from the media, but from the public, of better the devil you know. But we do get the narrative, oh, it's time for a change. And I've always wondered about that.
And I've been banging on about this for a while, so much so that I really should have the exact numbers at my fingertips by now. But we really haven't had very many 3-term governments in this country in our history. And the times that we have had a 3-term government, it's generally been either because something really big has happened and people have voted for continuity, or the opposition is in such a shambolic state that people have just voted for continuity again for the same reasons. But generally, people get to the end of our two terms of government, and people start thinking exactly like you said. Oh, it's time for a change. Oh, it's time for a change. So yeah, probably the clearest and truest thing that Luxon said today about those polls is that it says the Kiwis are ready for a change. Yep, well done. You actually answered that question and got that one right. Now, what are we changing to? That's the next question, and that's the one that we don't have an answer for yet.
Yeah. Now, speaking of elections, and people in the chat have already been talking about this tonight, right from the start of the show. 10:02 this came in. Good evening, everybody. It's a great day. Hershel Walker lost. Sai says yes, but it was close. Just shows how tribal US politics is. And JN says, thank the gods of sanity. Congrats, Mr. Warnock. I'm going to show you something that is last week's news, but I haven't played it on the show, and I think it's really worth playing. This is Barack Obama when he was campaigning for Raphael Warnock, talking about Hershel Walker, and kind of not pulling any punches.
But I also had to acknowledge that I did not think he had either the competence, the character, the track record of service that would justify him representing Georgia in the United States Senate. Now, if you had forgotten what I said the last time, it's okay, because you just have to wait a minute. He reminds you every time he opens his mouth. I mean, every day. Every day he comes up with something. Every day. Since the last time I was here. Since the last time I was here, Mr. Walker has been talking about issues that are of great importance to the people of Georgia. Like whether it's better to be a vampire or a werewolf. This is a debate that I must confess I once had myself. When I was 7. Then I grew up. In case you're wondering, by the way, Mr. Walker decided he wanted to be a werewolf, which is great. As far as I'm concerned, he can be anything he wants to be, except for a United States.
Don't you miss eloquent, smart, clever, and on that level sort of comedic, cutting commentary?
Yeah, I'd love to see Obama in one of those Comedy Central roasts. I think he'd be superb.
He'd be pretty good,
in one of those. I think he'd be great.
I didn't know this about Mr. Walker, and it's all this is all over, right? But I was listening to this in the last 24 hours. Mr. Walker says in a book in 2008 that he's being diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. He described his 12 alters, distinct identities that helped him cope with the trauma of being bullied as a child. He wrote of rage, out of control behavior. He played Russian roulette with a loaded gun. Now, as he tries to steady a campaign that could determine control of the Senate, Mr. Walker often speaks of these events in religious, not medical terms. He either denies the accusations or says he does not remember what happened. Still, he casts himself as a redemption story, saying he is a Christian saved by grace. And look, it's over, but the one part about this conversation that I think is still to happen is, should we bring it up? The results. 1.7 million Georgians here still voted for this man. And this is the point. Even though that was yesterday's news, those things I just shared, that was yesterday's news, that still led to 1.7 million Georgians voting for this man versus 1.8 million voting for Raphael Warnock. I think that's a massive conversation for the GOP going forward, and what that actually means for Georgia as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as one of your commentators said, I mean, both of the first two comments you put on were right. Yes, it is a great day because Walker lost, and the Democrats have just had that extra slight buffer zone in the Senate. But it's also incredibly close. It is, and it is tribalism. It is. I mean, to me, one of the most telling ones was the fact that, I mean, this is the guy who ran on a staunchly anti-abortion ticket, and then had to admit partway through his campaign that he had paid for his mistress's abortion. And not I
don't know if he ever admitted it.
Well,
I'm not sure if that's the case, but
okay, but it was certainly it seemed very clear. It seemed very
evident,
right?
Yeah.
And yet, it hardly made a dent in his support from the Republican base. And in fact, I saw people, Vox Pops, I saw people on the street being stopped and said it was less important to them than voting against a Democrat. And there is that tribalism. There is very much that fifth. I mean, so many of the it's not that different from the last. I mean, the 2020 elections. There were a lot of close calls. There were half a dozen runoffs in the end in that 2020 election.
Something like that.
Or, and just in case anyone, if I'm sure all of our viewers know this, but you only get a runoff if the actual election is literally too close to call. That in Georgia, the rule is somebody has to get over 50% of the vote, and neither of them did that. In other states, it's actually tallied down to the last vote. So the fact that it's so close to call with a candidate who, for so many people outside of Georgia, anywhere else in the world, even in most of the rest of the US, you look at this guy and just go, he's batshit crazy. Who's voting for him? Well, 1.7 million people are.
Yeah, and that's a really, I mean, like they talk about America being a like a divided country. it does raise up the question as well. I mean, for our own politics, for our own ideologies, do we live by any means to an end? Because that's what voting for him is. It's any means to an end. It's like the worst. Like if you drew a picture or you wrote a novel, and in that novel there was the worst person that could be a politician in your story, it's probably still not as bad as who Herschel Walker is. And you still, they're so, they so want to make sure that other parts are controlled that they'll vote for anything. I mean, I guess on some level that's Trump as well. Yeah. The other commentary I heard today, which was fascinating, was the early vote. I mean, people are talking about the early vote, and historically speaking, Republicans have been the ones to get out and vote early, and that all stopped with Trump, because Trump told people not to trust the system, not to vote early. And if they don't figure out a way to get that back, then they're going to be screwed for a very long time. And one other thing, because I learned this today, because I didn't know this. I mean, most people probably are aware that Raphael Warnock, called himself a Christian and called himself a pastor. Did you know he actually pastors Martin Luther King's former church?
Yes,
that's
where
he's a fucking pastor. So if you want kind of that Christian credential, like many in America do, a guy who pastors the church that was pastored by Martin Luther King Jr., I think would pretty much be at the top of your list, unless, of course, you claim this Christian credential, but of course, only if it's your side. If it's the other side's Christian credentials, even though probably one of the most, influential, serious, important Christians in American history, that doesn't count. That's not enough.
I think there's two really interesting things to come out of this Georgia thing. The first one is the fact that yes, it's been incredibly close, but there really hasn't been. I think a lot of us were I certainly was expecting that in these close run races that there'd be this tidal wave of, oh, it's rigged. It's not really happening in these midterms, mainly because Trump's not involved. In fact, about the only person who's accused some of these things of being rigged is Trump himself. So that argument is falling away. The other thing that happens today is that this runoff, and there were a couple of the Kerry Lake runoff earlier on. It wasn't a runoff, but the close election. Plus, throw in today those 14 guilty verdicts in the Trump Corporation financial law cases in New York State. The more of these little things that tick over will have an effect on Trump's run in 24, because if there's one thing that he and and by association his followers can't stand, it's a loser. It's someone who, he's said it so many times, can't stand losers, can't stand people who are losing. Well, today he had two big losses. And there's been a string of them recently. So yeah, it's a small thing. It's still a very tight race, but it's encouraging. It's an encouraging sign.
I put this tweet out yesterday just because you brought up the the thing around the Trump and getting elected, and the trusting the system. This is the tweet I put out yesterday. If Ron DeSantis beats Donald Trump to become the 24 GOP nominee, what will MAGA do when Trump claims fraud/stolen election again to explain the loss? So he's not going to say he lost. He's not going to go out quietly. If DeSantis wins, that's what it's like, that idea that once you've attacked everybody else, you start eating your own. That's the last thing that happens. And what happens in the GOP then, when Trump has to explain a loss to DeSantis, the only way he can, other than losing face and being honest, by claiming fraud?
Well, it's already happening in some ways. If you look at the way that there was basically a line drawn straight down the middle of the Republican Party after the last election, where Liz Cheney had ended up costing her jobs, various committees, because she had the audacity to stand up and say Trump was wrong and he had actually lost. And it'll just be more of the same. He'll blame any moderate Republican. He'll say the party's been turned around. I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but there was a feeling. I would not have been surprised when he had his big announcement after the midterms, a couple of days after the midterms, November 24th, I think it was. he said, "I'm having the biggest announcement that, one of the most important announcements in American history," and it was him announcing his presidency. I would not have been surprised that day if he'd announced, if he'd done pulled a Ross Perot, where he'd come out and said that he was going to run as a third party, start his own, Make America Great Again party. I could see that happening if he loses to DeSantis. I could see him absolutely turning around and deciding to strike out in his own and to run as a third party candidate. And all that would do would be half the vote for the Republicans.
That would be the most glorious 6 months of television,
wouldn't it?
there has ever been. We would become a US politics only show for those 6 months. It would be
fantastic.
Unbelievable.
I mean, I've loved the there's been a couple of third party Ralph Nader was there, Ross Perot, they were the same party, and they were, I don't know if you ever saw any of the presidential or the vice presidential debates that year, were just hilarious. They were just superb because it was a guy called Admiral Stockton who was Perot's running mate, and he just answered everything completely honestly, often didn't listen because he'd forgotten to turn his hearing aid on before the debates. They were fantastic. So yeah, bring that back. I'd love that. Trump, Carrie Lake as running as a double team. That's what I'm predicting. I'm predicting it now. Trump Lake 24.
I'm almost barred up. The thought of that actually happening would be divine. Very quickly, Free Soul, obviously, yes, you've missed the Baby Will Court discussion, but I've started on most evenings, and I probably will tonight, depends how late we finish actually, I'm actually chaptering each show. So normally within about 20 minutes of the show finishing, they're chaptered up, so you can go and find, there'll be a Baby Will chapter that you'll be able to click on and watch it in about 15 or 20 minutes, or you can just watch back the
Baby
show
Will, very different from Baby Shark, by the way, in case anyone's confusing.
Yeah, although and Baby Trump, they're all kind of as thin-skinned and they cry a lot as much as each other, really.
Yeah, indeed.
That Baby Shark, right, that song, that was performed by a girl who lives in New Zealand.
I think I vaguely knew that, actually.
Yeah.
Here's a fun New Zealand fact I found out the other day. Did you know instant coffee was invented by a guy from Invercargill?
I did not.
I did not know that. I don't know if he invented it while he was living in Invercargill, but I did not know that.
Did you know that the jet boat was invented in New Zealand? Did you know that
I did know.
Split the atom? We could keep going. We've got about 4 things, haven't we? And the Britain motorbike, and then we kind of stop after that.
Yeah. Well, you see, I'm amazed that we haven't claimed instant. I'm surprised there isn't a massive mug of instant coffee in the middle of Invercargill.
Yeah.
For tourists to take photos in front of.
Yeah. All right. Oh gosh, Scott. I'm not going to do it because it'll get us kicked off our YouTube. But Scott says he's never heard Baby Shark do Baby Shark do.
Scott, Google it and we'll see you in a week because you'll still be listening to it.
Emma, it is a Korean song, but if you look up girl who sung, look on YouTube, girl who sung Baby Shark, and it might have been on 7 Sharp or something like that. And they interviewed her, and she's, I don't know, somewhere in New Zealand, kind of living in rural New Zealand. NZ. I'm googling it while we speak. There we go. Masterton. So that's lives in Masterton. There's the girl. Bring it up. I'm not going to bring it up entirely. There's the girl who sung Baby Shark. That's who she is. That's her. And she lives in Masterton. Well, she lived at that point in Masterton. This was 4 years ago. So there you go. There it is. There she is. She lived in Masterton.
Oh God. Okay. Good.
So there you go. I always remember that's one of my favorite jokes from Raybon Khan. He'd talk about getting racially discriminated against. I can remember it really clearly, and he goes, these people who always used to tell me to go home, I should go home. He goes, I don't want to go back to Masterton. I love that. It's such a good joke.
Great line. Yeah.
All right. Hey Jeremy, it's been lovely having you on. Thank you for
lovely you're back, and
thank you for
fingers crossed.
me.
Fingers crossed for the next 48 hours. Hope you get through it unscathed. But if you don't, rest up, and we'll see you again when you're back.
Yeah. So I will if the dirty C word gets me. We have a new C word now. You know that. If the dirty C word gets me, then I probably will just take a couple of nights off to rest up and recuperate. Even if it, to be honest with you, even if it's not terrible, because I don't want it to kick in. So
yeah, absolutely.
Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Pat Brittenden, or make sure you have a look, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click that like button. What do you say this day? Smash that subscribe button, something like that.
Yeah.
And if something happens and I go down, then we'll announce it. And if it happened to happen, it happened tomorrow, and I was down, I imagine we'll be back by Monday anyway, because that'd give me basically 5 days, because it'd be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and most of Monday. So fingers crossed. I'm not keen to have it. I'm not keen to get it, but if it should happen, then there'll be a few days off, and we will see. So you'll know. And if it does happen, then I will certainly put it out on Twitter that it's happening. And so if you follow me on Twitter, then you'll know before the evening happens. But mind you, you could also just sit in front of your computer at this time of night and just watch the screen.
Yeah, because if you're doing that, you're not out and about, so you're not going to get COVID. So.
I'll show you what we could do, Jeremy. I've got a bunch of people who love me playing this highlight from Heather Duplessis Allen. I could just put this on loop, this highlight.
You went to Fiji.
I could play a loop of this for an hour.
Serious?
I think that'll give you COVID,
Are you
wouldn't it?
serious, is he?
I didn't have
That's my Heather Duplessis Allen clip. All right, team. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight, everybody. Really appreciate you being with us.
Lovely. Thanks for watching, listening.
Wear your mask. Think about yourself and think about the people around you. Be safe. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of the Big Hairy News. All right, team.